Elon Musk has officially left his role at the Department of Government Efficiency. However, Musk and President Trump both say the work of DOGE will continue. But what's the future for the department without Musk? Joining us now to discuss is Mike Leon. He's an NTD News contributor, as well as the host of the podcast, Can We Please Talk? Also joining us is economic and public policy analyst Thomas Savidge. He's a research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining. Mike, the president and Musk have had a unique relationship when Musk came aboard and began campaigning during the election. So what are your thoughts as he now departs Washington?
Hey, good morning, first and foremost, Kerry. It's mixed reactions because I think you and I have talked about this a bunch, and I've talked about this a bunch on NTD programs everywhere, is that there is waste, fraud, and abuse that happens within government spending, right? We all want to get to the bottom of that. Even Representative Jared Moskowitz, who's a Democrat down here in my state of Florida, has said that several times in different committee hearings. Yes, I want to work with you. He was one of the first people to be very vocal about reaching across the aisle and saying, yeah, let's work to reduce the waste, the fraud, and abuse that does happen with respect to government spending. But by any metric that you look at this, let's just go by the math part of this, Kerry. If I told you I was going to write your check for $2 trillion and I wrote your check for $135 billion, you would be like, Mike, you're missing a lot of zeros. And that's kind of what's going to end up happening here with respect to the DOGE savings. If you look at his personal businesses and you look at, the Tesla's first quarter losses in April from their P&L statement, obviously he's taken a hit from his personal side. And then lastly, you mentioned the relationship with the president, and he just is very vocal, Elon Musk, about the one big beautiful bill. And he's gotten into arguments with obviously Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and he's called Peter Navarro dumb and doesn't understand anything. And then they've gone back and forth with the barbs. So I think by any metric and any way you slice it, it's been a failure. But I say failure, and I don't mean it in the connotation that it's perceived. I mean it more in terms of he said he was going to save this by his own account, $2 trillion. If we can get to $1 trillion, great. We're not even in the T, we're in the B. And there's been a lot of things that have happened to different government employees, but that's potentially.
Lots to unpack there. Thomas, love to get your analysis on Musk in Washington and leaving Washington.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have to concur with my co-panelist here. There's been much left to be seen, and while there is a lot of savings, and it's only the U.S. government could make billions of dollars look like drops in the bucket because of how much it spends. And there are some things that I was happy about with DOGE, like going after the CFPB and trying to shut that down. But unfortunately, it seems like the federal courts tried to stop a lot of that. And then other things I wish DOGE really dove into, like entitlement spending. Because really, if you're looking at it, last fiscal year, 53 cents of every dollar was spent on entitlements. And, that's just not just throwing money at the problem. It's how these programs are structured. Because if you're asking the folks who are on these programs, they're not happy with the services. And if you're asking the taxpayers who are paying for this stuff, of course, they're not happy about it either. Nobody's winning. So I think the next step then, as Mr. Musk steps back, is not just looking at where can we cut spending here and there. It's how do we restructure the programs that benefit ordinary Americans, that allow Americans to keep more of their paycheck and decrease that spending and overall decrease that national debt.
And Mike, staying with the theme that Thomas has brought up about iterating and improving on the efficiencies to create better service, but also reduce spending. Musk had said that DOGE would always continue on. So what do you think Musk's legacy is specific to DOGE? Because sometimes founding something is harder than sort of, improving upon it. So what do you think? You've already kind of shared that you think it's a failure, but is there any legacy in just getting this off the ground?
Yeah, and again, failure, I don't want to call him a failure. I think the idea and the notion is agreed upon by everybody, whether you have an R or a D next to your name. I mean, Barack Obama introduced 2 special government employees, as you see Thomas shaking his head, because we all remember in 2009, and this is on obama.whitehouse.archives, you can read this up, he introduced 2 special government employees to do something similar to what Elon Musk was trying to accomplish. So I think, like you said, Kerry, sometimes you prop something up and you can only take it as far as you can. And I'll quote something that Musk said back in May 1st with a USA Today interview, where he said there's a lot of inertia within the government when it comes to trying to, eliminate cost, right? Anytime you try to eliminate redundancies or you try to cut staff or you take a hatchet to something as opposed to a scalpel, what you're going to have are not only problems, Kerry, but you're going to find out that when they made these cuts at different departments, there's knowledge transfer that goes out the window, right? So now I have to potentially rehire people. And then there's, as Thomas mentioned, there's legal battles, right? They're still in the courts right now, potentially employees that will get their job back because a federal judge has ruled that the executive branch doesn't have the authority to eliminate their position. So the government doesn't operate like a business. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump, too, to a certain extent, have tried to operate the government as a business, and it doesn't operate as that. So the legacy will always be he's shifted the conversation about the role of special government employees, the role of somebody coming from the outside business world to government to assess and try to figure out where we can eliminate costs. Because I think, again, there is a universal agreement that we should eliminate certain things that are stuffed into bills that shouldn't be a part of that will affect the American taxpayer down the road. The question is, who's looking at it, one, and how do we actually implement it or remove it, et cetera, et cetera?
And Thomas, same question over to you, just about the future of the DOGE effort and the culture with Musk now out of the picture.
There's definitely going to be an uphill battle for government efficiency because, again, that key word there is inertia. And, it's exactly right. They're trying to run the government like a business, but when you're looking at the incentives, they're way different from a business. A business, you want to provide people with a good or service at a price they're willing to pay. In government, especially in bureaucracy, your incentives are driven by, and your success is measured by the number of people working under you and how big your discretionary budget is. And so those kind of measurements of success not only invite you to grow, but invite mission creep. And so that's why there's so much inertia when you're trying to streamline government and trying to do right by the taxpayers. One thing I look forward to, I see as hopeful for the future, is the deregulation requests they set up through the Federal Register, that DOGE is set up. In fact, my colleague Paul Mueller and I submitted a deregulation request for a Department of Labor rule that set up under President Biden that allowed private pension plan managers to incorporate things like ESG and DEI into pension plan decisions, into shareholder voting, and into shareholder company board nominations. And so hopefully that request to deregulate, to get that regulation out of there, doesn't fall on deaf ears.
And Mike, as we finish up in just the last 30 seconds here, your thoughts on deregulation and as it relates to the inertia that you both have really pointed to in this conversation.
Well, I hope that people can take away that there's compromise and the overarching premise of all of this. I think for Elon Musk right now, as he heads back to the private sector, and you saw his recent interview that he just mentioned right there, that he had, I believe it was yesterday with CBS News, he was talking a lot about the future, right? And I think he's forever changed the conversation of what we want to do with respect to having special government employees and all of this. But my hope is that, as Thomas just mentioned there before, that there are certain things that we take away from their time spent. And the employees that are still, Caroline Levitt has mentioned, there are still employees that have gone on to other agencies to try to figure out how they can potentially work with those agencies and eliminate costs. But at the end of the day, you can't run the government the same way you run a business. I think that's the tagline of this segment, Kerry. You can't run the business like you run the government.
Deregulation, inertia, a lot to discuss here. Appreciate you both joining me this morning. Mike Leon, Thomas Savidge. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.